Good afternoon, network. I am sorry off the bat that there was a bit of confusion there with the link that was sent out initially. That's my bad. Apparently, didn't take my changes well enough. Oh, technology, so wonderful when you work, so mystifying when you don't. Um, we are. I'm very happy to be on episode 36 of Recruiting EQ, starting your own agency in a scorching hot vertical. Great guest lined up for today. He's going to be with us momentarily, but he is at work today, just like the rest of us. So he'll be here any minute. Graydon Welburn, very stoked to share his story with you guys, as I did get a chance to hear some of it. While we are waiting for Graydon, a couple things that I wanted to bring up that we were observing in the market. And I don't know if any of you guys are listening, if you have any comments on this, but it does seem, and I don't want to jinx it, but it does seem like there is some movement in the market. So multiple clients of ours are beginning to hire more quickly, which is the kind of I'm hopefully seeing some of this slingshot effect we've been seeing, where it's like people have been holding back, holding back, holding back, straight through 2023, straight through most of 2024, with some little exceptions here and there. And that seems to actually be switching in the right direction. So hopefully you guys are seeing the same thing and that you're not, still stuck. But if you are, things should be shifting very quickly. Lots of different trends that we're seeing in the market right now. But another thing that we had not seen from a rec to rec perspective for God, I want to say at least 12 months, if not 18 months, was very few recruiter positions. And that too has shifted. I had a video that I put out just a few days ago about this, or late last week, about go-to-market recruiters, meaning recruiters who have, a good network, solid network of people and success, placing people in roles that are sales or marketing driven. So like senior, sales managers, marketing managers, right up to C-level, difficult positions to fill, right? And often these are positions that you're going to an agency for because you have trouble filling them yourself, and even the agency has trouble filling them. So those kinds of recruitment positions definitely seem to be back in demand. A few different clients talking about them. All very promising stuff. And again, there's that AI piece that keeps coming in and out of fashion. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Lots of jobs being switched over. Please do let us know here, regardless of where you're watching this, in comments, or feel free to comment, send me a direct message either on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, if you guys are seeing anything interesting in the market. This topic today, I think, is kind of near and dear to my heart specifically because this gentleman, he'll tell you his story as well, but he comes from the music business, so do I. And in the music business, you do talk a lot about trends, about what's hot and what's not. There's certain universals that work in the music business, but we all know this. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of emphasis on the music part of the music business any longer. A lot of it has to do with what somebody looks like, what somebody acts like. So social media plays a big part of it, and I feel like those elements are starting to become prevalent. In other words, personal branding, visual branding, people doing things like I'm doing right now, right? Having a podcast type content, lots of posting, and who you are and your brand is a big part of it. So that seems to be ubiquitous in today's market as we push to the future. But at the same time, there are still some new industries coming out, right? And AI is one of them. There's a lot of pros and cons that come with jumping onto the bandwagon of something that is a hot topic, that hasn't really been well established as yet. So again, if you are watching this and you can comment, I welcome any kind of anecdotes or questions or, comments that you may have about that whole bandwagon mentality. Something new hits the market and you quit what you're doing, which is old fashioned, jump on the bandwagon. Or maybe you're a trailblazer like this guy, Graydon, for whenever he shows up. I had to let some people into meetings, but he'll be here soon. On the cannabis front, which is where White Ash, the company that he works, incidentally, bonus points for anyone who could name the movie poster that I redacted there, starring Dave Chappelle, which is, well, I'll just give it away. It's half baked. Um, might as well have a little fun if we're talking about the cannabis industry. Highly controversial. We'll save some of this gold for when Graydon is on here. But I'm on my phone right now because I got a couple of stats here. So the staffing and recruiting agency in Canada in 2017 was a $14.5 billion industry, of which 9.2 billion was estimated market for contract or temporary staffing areas. Let's let him in.
Hey, sorry.
How are you? No worries.
Can you hear me okay, or should I put my headphones in?
I hear you fine.
Amazing. Sorry about that. I just had to let someone in to interview.
No worries. You, like the rest of us, are working right now, so that's just the name of the game.
Name of the game. That's right.
Well, so thanks for being here with us today to have a chat. Again, this is episode 36 of Recruiting EQ, starting your own agency in a scorching hot vertical. Great. And I was just mentioning that I feel like on my end anyway, the market has finally sort of shifted a little bit in speed. Hiring managers seem to be hiring finally. Are you seeing any of that in your world, or how's that looking?
I would say so, yes. In terms of our, like from a data and numbers perspective, the last 2 years for us were basically, so 2022 and 2023 were essentially the same. Prior to that, we had experienced a ton of growth. And then the last 2 years, it was the same. And I kind of noticed some hiring managers becoming, trigger shy and things moving slower. But this year, it's definitely picked up for sure. Things are moving a little bit faster. I think part of that is the market, and then part of that's just me maturing in how I manage clients. I think I'm just probably doing a little bit better of a job and stick holding and shepherding the process a bit more. From my perspective, though, I would agree with you.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because we can touch on this later on too. Is I feel like being in a tough market does sharpen your skills. You have to. You have no choice.
Yeah. I feel like I always make this joke to my other recruiter friends that it feels like, so I've had White Ash for 6 years, and it feels like I've probably, like made maybe 3 or 4 agencies because of the amount of business development I have to constantly do, because I am in a new market where I'll be working with a client and they'll be our number one client for a year. And then, 6 months into the next calendar year, they're not hiring, they're not around, or they get bought. And then they fire HR or whoever our contact was there. And then we're just essentially eliminated from the system and the process there. So we're constantly doing business development. Like it just doesn't stop. And I mean, I understand that most agencies want to do that, but I do know that there are, boutique agencies out there that get, 3 whales and they can just ride that into the sunset.
So, yeah, for sure.
Exactly. And we don't have that luxury over here.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we tee this up then a little bit? Pardon me. First of all, if you can introduce yourself to people who are listening, and maybe tell them a little bit what you do, and then let's dive in.
Yeah. So my name is Graydon Wellborn. I am the co-founder and managing partner of White Ash Group. White Ash Group is a recruitment, staffing, and executive search firm that focuses specifically and solely on the cannabis industry. So all of our end clients that we do hiring for are within the legal cannabis space. We like to say we handle anything from seed to sale, roots to suits, which is just our way of saying, anyone that's touching the plant all the way up to a C-suite executive. So anything and everything in between. We work across Canada, we work across the US, and we are also now in Australia, and we also do work in Europe. And that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Now, obviously, I have a million questions. I know that other people probably have a million questions about how this plays out. I love that you slipped the word legal in there, just like the legal cannabis industry.
Yeah.
It needs to be identified. That's just kind of like, yeah, we deal in cannabis. Legal cannabis.
Yeah. I mean, there's still, I have friends whose parents I've known for a long time, and I think they think I'm a drug dealer. And I'm not. So I always try to be really specific with with that. And there's a lot of stigma obviously involved in the industry that I work in. A lot
Yeah.
of times when I had initially started White Ash, and I would tell people, at social events that I recruit within the cannabis industry, they would be like, "Oh, can you get me a job? I love weed," or "I'm really good at rolling joints." And I'm like, "No, that has
Yeah.
nothing to do with anything."
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. I'm
yeah,
passionate
I'm
about
not,
weed.
yeah. I mean, being passionate is definitely that'll be helpful because I think the industry will wear you down. And if you don't have the passion, you might be like, why am I doing this? Because I think that the passion provides the why for a lot of people in the industry. But it's not like I don't sit here just completely chiefing and, blowing smoke out all day.
Yeah.
That's not just because I work in the cannabis industry doesn't mean I'm an incredible, like, stoner that's just
Yeah. Yeah.
funk.
For sure.
So
I love use of the word chiefing in this case. It's like because you could be like the chiefing officer, maybe. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
get right in there.
Mhm.
I'm gonna tee this up. You tell me if this is correct or not. But I went to a little thing called Google to just sort of compare industries. Like we're talking. So in Canada, just to look at Canada,
Mhm.
recruiting. I was just saying this as you joined. Recruiting and staffing and recruiting, whatever. In 2017, most accurate numbers I could find was 14.5 billion dollar industry in Canada for staffing and recruiting. Period, the whole thing. Of which 9.2 billion was temp staffing. So
Mhm.
big emphasis on the temp staffing. Those are older numbers. I would imagine that's probably gone down a little in the staffing and recruiting world the way these past few years have gone. But the
Mhm.
cannabis industry in 2023 saw apparently a growth of a few percentage points and
Mhm.
is approaching $13 billion as an industry in Canada alone.
Mhm.
So both the all of staffing and recruiting put together and cannabis are almost in the same revenue generating ballpark in this country.
That is amazing. I didn't know that. So thank you for telling me
This is
that.
according to Google, so maybe it requires some deep dive fact checking. I'm not saying it. I'm an expert
Sounds
on this,
about
but
right, though. It sounds about right. I think a lot of people forget that recruiting is it's a specific skill, and
yeah,
there's a reason there is an industry. Not everyone does it, just like how there's a reason there's accountants and things like that. So, mhm.
well, absolutely. So I just think that, and the cannabis industry, I think that there's some people who still look at me funny when I say, like, I had a candidate who did not work at White Ash, but full disclosure, not at White Ash. Candidate worked for one of your competitors, I would imagine, then a few years ago, and now he's somewhere else. I presented him to a UK firm, and one of the guys in the UK was just kind of like, "Are you kidding me? His last job before here, he was working in cannabis, like, and he
Mhm.
tells people this like openly."
Yeah,
And I
I
was like,
can't believe
"Yeah,
it.
dude." I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe it's not as widely publicized as I think, but I live in downtown Toronto. There are dispensaries next to dispensaries across the street of dispensaries on Queen West. Like,
Beside
there's
a
just so
Starbucks.
many of them.
Yeah.
Besides, no, there's no more Starbucks. There's one Starbucks
Yeah,
and five dispensaries for
that's
one
true.
Starbucks. That's
Yeah,
the
that's
ratio
true.
nowadays here.
Yeah, yeah, that is true.
So
Yeah, it's I mean, my business partner Jerome is from the UK, so he always jokes about how his friends back home just think it's insane what he does. You know? Yeah.
yeah, they think he's in the Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Yes, great
That
movie.
tool to reference. It's an ancient reference. I know I'm old.
Mhm.
So Graydon, there's another thing that you and I have in common, which is that you came from the music industry first, to an
Yes.
extent, if I recall.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and musicians getting into staffing, it didn't seem obvious to me before, but and we chatted about this briefly. I think there's a lot of transferable skills you learn from being in the music industry to go into staffing.
Yeah, there is. It's all like the music industry. I'm still involved in it, and it's all based on connections and being genuine with people and building bridges and remembering things. And I've always just the music industry really really taught me that the person that you meet today, nothing is going to transpire from it necessarily. It's probably going to be 6 months or 2 years or 3 years down the road,
Yeah,
and if you can have that mentality, I believe that you can win in both industries. Like the people who win are in recruitment and the music industry are people who understand that, and they treat the janitor the same way they treat the CEO, because one day the janitor is the CEO and you get that. So when you understand that, you are more open to speaking with people. You are, reasonable, fair, and understanding and empathetic. And I think I learned a lot of that through my journey within the music industry, and it translated really. Like I felt when I started recruiting, I was like, oh, this is like, I just understand this. I just get this,
Yeah.
because it was like I was always the connector anyways. I was always the middleman, putting something, one person over here and another person here, and bringing them together. And that's really what recruitment is. And so when I started in recruitment at the last firm I worked for, it just like things just really clicked for me. And I think a lot of it had to do with the way I approached the music industry, which was from like, how do I generate value for other people and,
Yeah.
make things work for other people, and then things will be good for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's transferable too. I don't know about you, but I felt like the concept of someone being the right fit cannot be overstated in the music business, right? Like, I mean, if you have
Totally.
a band, right? If you have a band, if like the Velvet Underground is never going to want to have Steve Vai on guitar, or
Right.
vice versa, right? You're not going to have a metalhead guitarist in a punk rock band or whatever else. Like, it's not about the best guitarist. I'm not looking for the best guitarist. I'm looking for,
It's
I
the
might
fit.
want Iggy Pop in here instead of, you know what I mean? So you
Mhm.
just need the fit. And I think that is something that is lacking a little bit in recruitment, is just picking it up quickly and getting it even better than
Yeah.
your clients.
I think that when I do training at White Ash, I try to break down what the concept of recruitment is, because a lot of people come in and they think, oh, we get people jobs. And I try not to look at it that way. I try to look at it that the result of our work is that someone gets a job, but we're not
Mhm.
getting people jobs, because if we were getting people jobs, we would be I don't know what they're called, like a what are they called?
Employment
Job agencies,
services.
employment
Yeah,
services. Yeah, that's not what it is. We're matching business requirements with skill and experience within an individual, and the result of that, them coming together in that match, is oftentimes employment. But
yep,
having that mindset and that shift really it matters, because that's how, the lens that you see everything through.
for sure.
Because if you don't see it that way, what you can what ends up happening is you start forcing things
Yep,
in one way or another. And I always say, if you are forcing something, it might work out in the short term, but in the long term, it is certainly going to break. So whether that's someone doesn't quite fit for a job, maybe you're forcing things with a client, and you're just not jiving, and there's not real alignment there. Maybe you can like kind of make it work, and it's clunky, but at some point it's going to break. And I'm in year 6 now of owning the company. I think I've been in recruitment for 9 years or something like that. And I've really learned that the way I like to do business is just to not force things, because of course you have to like hustle and go out there and make things
right.
happen and have these
Constant
conversations. But
story.
just, being acting out of desperation is never a place where you're going to win. Anxiety, desperation, these are all things that happen to recruiters, and acting from a place from that is really just a way to shoot yourself in the foot, whether it's in the short term or the long term, because someone's going to quit, you're going to have to replace them, then you're doing double the work, and you get in these cycles. So I really believe that the mindset really matters. So I try to like teach that to my team.
Yeah, it definitely, and that's how you get the trust of your clients as well, right? Is
Mhm.
by really understanding what you're doing and getting better communication. Let's
Mhm.
back up for a sec though. So you were in tech staffing, IT staffing first.
Mhm.
What brought you to staffing in the first place? How did you get into staffing?
Shout out to my good friends Brendan and Braden. I was working on Queen Street at a clothing store, and I was hosting parties and at clubs and doing different events as well with the clothing company. And I was just becoming a really connected individual in the city. On top of
Yeah.
that, I was, involved in music, and I had gone on tours, and I had played a bunch of shows and helped put on shows and events and things like that. And I had a couple friends that had moved to Toronto from Calgary, because I'm originally from Calgary, and I would bring them out and I introduced them to everyone I knew, and I knew a lot of people, and I remembered everyone's name, and I remember them making a remark like, "How do you remember everyone?" And I just was like, "I don't know. I just remember everyone's name." And my skill in that is kind of dwindling now, but back then I was like really incredible at remembering people's names and things about them. And they worked at a recruitment firm, and they said, hey, you'd be really good at recruiting. And I said, I didn't know what that was. They explained it to me, and I thought, okay, that might be cool. I don't have a university degree. I dropped out. I went to U of T for 2 years, and then I left to be in the music industry. So at the time, it was in my early 20s, and I thought, well, no one's going to hire me because I had the belief about the degree. And they said, no, don't worry, we'll get you an interview. And it was a really intense interview process. Like, I remember it was like,
Yeah.
it was a aptitude test of some sort, and then it was two or three, I think it was 3 rounds. And I remember the last round, I was wearing a suit, and the back of my suit was drenched in sweat, because by then I had
Really?
realized I want this. Yeah, by then I had realized I wanted the job, and it was like a pretty,
Right.
it was probably one of the more intense interviews I'd ever done in my life, definitely at that point. And I remember like just telling uh, I think she was the COO at the time, like, or one of the managing directors. I was like, if you hire me, this is going to be a really good decision. Like, this is going to be a good decision on your part, like, you're going to I'm gonna like crush it. And yeah, that's how I got into recruitment. It was like one of those classic
That's
things
awesome.
where like you just fall into it. And it made a lot of sense with me, because prior to that, like I said, being in the music industry, I was always connecting people. But even back to high school, I was like the person that you could come to and say, hey, like, do you know someone who, I don't know, like skateboards, or do you know someone that does photography, or do you know someone that has tickets to this event, or whatever it might be. I was just always the guy that had like connections to things, because I liked the idea of being connected to different groups of people and not just siloing myself to like
Yeah.
my friend group. I wanted to be involved in like, I wanted to be friends with, the athletes and the cool kids and like the nerds. And then I wanted to be friends with, guys that were older than me and doing different things in different industries. I was always excited by that. And so recruitment just made a lot of sense to me. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that you raise a good point there. So I kind of was similar, and I think there are people in recruitment who I feel, or and in the music business, who get that naturally, that like social networking is a kind of currency, and they just sort
Mhm.
of live like that a little bit. And I think
Yeah,
if you can turn that into something consistent, then you're golden in recruiting.
totally. Yeah, it is like, yeah, and it's a way of seeing, the world, because it's like, instead of being like, what can you do for me, you see the world as, what can I do for you, is really
That's
the way.
interesting.
Yeah, like, is the lens that you start seeing it. And so when you have that lens, you see everything differently, because you have a conversation with someone, and then you go, they should talk to this person. And that's
Yeah,
how I was living my life. I wasn't saying like, oh, you should do this thing for me now.
right.
What ends up happening though is 10 years later, those people do things for you, and they come around and they do a favor for you. But if you start with, what can I do for them, it's a really, it just creates like good connections, good bonds, good faith. And then with recruitment, um, like at White Ash, we have people, we've been kind of eyeing and speaking to for like 5 years. and we finally get them somewhere, and it's like an awesome job,
super
and
gratifying whenever that
it's
happens.
so rewarding. And like they're like emotional about it because they know we've been in their corner for so long, because we thought so highly of them, and we've connected them to different interviews, and then finally something clicks, and then it just clicks so easily, and it's so great to see. And there's so much, it's recruitment's one of those things where it's like win-win-win, right? That's why I also love it, because it's not in sales in the way that it's just like I'm getting you selling something to you and that's it. It's like I'm getting, someone gets a job, someone gets an awesome employee or a team member, I get paid, and everyone's happy. So it's like this nice sort of trifecta.
I agree with you about it being different than other sales in a good way. But so like, let's back up to you deciding to leave tech staffing to start your own business and to do so in cannabis recruitment. Obviously, you were already recruiting, so it's a short putt there. I mean, I remember 6 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, everybody was talking about that, right? Like because it was such a highly publicized thing, particularly in Ontario, but everywhere in Canada, that the legalization was going to hit and everything was going to go bonkers, and every province handled it differently.
Yeah.
Was it just based on the buzz of everything that was happening? Like why? Because cannabis recruitment wasn't really a thing that you could do easily at the time until it was.
It came about in a couple different ways, which I think is, looking back, a lot of big moments in my life probably came about because of several different sort of forces, if you will. So in 2016, I had just started recruiting at the tech firm, and then I was dating a girl who had an older brother, and he worked at a big consulting firm, and he would make me buy him weed. And I would go into the dispensaries on the weekend and I would buy him weed, and he would pay me back. And I said to him, why don't you just go yourself? Like, you live down the street. Like, you don't need me to do this. And he's like, well, I don't want people to see me in there. I was like, well, it's legal. And he's like, yeah, but it's, I don't want people to see me in there. And so then I thought, okay, well, there's obviously this market that likes smoking weed. And even though it's becoming legal, it wasn't officially legal in 2016, but like it was legal, basically. You're not getting arrested.
There were dispensaries everywhere anyway. Yeah, for sure.
So I figured, okay, there's a market here where there's a group of people that want to consume cannabis but don't want to be known to be consuming cannabis. So I thought, why don't I make like a delivery app that is basically like an Uber Eats of cannabis, and I target it not to people who are openly excited about weed, but the people that like secretly like weed. So
are you suggesting you created the Ashley Madison of weed? Is that what you're saying right now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I had no idea what I was doing. I don't know how old I was, 23, 24. I had no clue what I was doing at all. And I sort of like went down a rabbit hole and spent a lot of money. And, I hired an awesome UI developer and a software developer. And I got to a point where I was like, I don't really know how to launch this, and I don't have any more money, and I didn't know how to navigate the regulatory framework. Like I didn't have a point of reference for that, and I didn't know who to turn to. So I stopped that, and then I thought, why don't I make a cannabis clothing line? Because at the time I was wearing funky socks to the office. That was my way of self-expressing. So I would wear funny like socks with like burgers or Spider-Man on them. And with my
burgers
suit.
or Spider-Man, that's the spectrum.
Yeah. And then I thought, why don't I make, cannabis socks and market them to, I don't know, people who like cannabis and people who wear socks. And so I did that for a bit. And then I thought, I don't actually like doing this. This is not like fun to me, because it was so like I wasn't speaking to anyone. It was just me running ads and like finding suppliers. I wasn't like doing any person-to-person connection. And then in 2017 or 2018, I kind of started getting frustrated a bit with my job. And, I really liked the people there. a lot. It was
Yeah.
a great group of people. But there was just some things that I just didn't align with that were happening there. A lot of it was around process, and I'm probably not the best at following sets of rules when I can see that there's a better way to do things. And so we were a national company, and sort of the process was a blanket across the company, even though sometimes the process didn't make sense with our office or the clients
Sure.
that I was dealing with and things like that. And so that was a
It's a
little bit
big
like,
company. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
it's a big company. You're going to have a lot of corporate red tape,
yeah, exactly. And, the older I get, the more I really understand why that is. But at the time, it was obviously frustrating. And I felt like I was a little bit like limited in my ability to continue to like grow and make more commission. And so I was thinking about, what's my next step here? And then I was at the same time interested in cannabis. And then I thought, okay, I got to get into the cannabis industry somehow. And then my older brother, Jameson, he worked in real estate at the time, and he phoned me one day and he said, "You need to get in the cannabis industry." And I was like, "Well, I've been trying. I don't really know. Like, I've kind of failed a couple times. I don't really know what to do." And he was like, "Why don't you just do what you do, but for cannabis companies?" And I was like, and he like hung up the phone. And
Just
I was
left
like,
you with this wonder. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, that's a pretty good idea. And then I thought about it more, and I realized that the big companies, like the one I worked for and all our competitors on Bay Street, weren't going to touch cannabis with a 10-foot pole, even when it became legal, because they
Yeah.
had, they had Amazon and Google and TD Bank. Like, they didn't need to touch this new industry that was volatile and had a stigma around it. And then I figured on the flip side that the cannabis entrepreneurs, if you will, starting these licensed producers and putting their life savings into these businesses, they would want to deal with someone that really understood them, spoke their language, and was empathetic to sort of the plight that they of beginning an industry and
Yeah.
you know driving a rocket ship while changing the engine, so to speak. That's like a phrase everyone uses in the industry. And so I thought, okay, if I've got like a very narrow and deep niche here, where if I could dedicate a recruitment firm just to cannabis, that would probably be something. And then on top of that, I made a lot of commission that year for the company, and I felt a little bit like I deserved a little bit more, as
Right.
every good salesperson feels at one
It
point in their life.
happens.
So I thought, okay, I've got this idea. I've got proof that I know what I'm doing. If I could just make half as much as I'm making for the company for myself, I'd be pretty happy. And so I started going to events outside of work, going to cannabis, just like gatherings, and just checking in on people and saying like, "Hey, like, how many people are you going to hire?" And they'd be like, "I don't know, 500." And I'd be like, "Where are you going to find them?" And they're like, "I don't know. People we'll just find them." And I was like, "Okay, so no one has a strategy. That's cool." And um,
Yeah.
I did that a couple times, and looking back on it, I probably should have done like more market research, but I was really just like, I was really motivated by like running my own thing and having freedom to build something the way I wanted it to be. So to me, it was like my number one goal was like get out of my current employment and like free myself and sort of like unchain my ability and like unshackle myself, if you will. And then I had been introduced to my now business partner through some mutual connections. We met for a coffee, and we were given misinformation about each other. He thought I was trying to make a construction
Oh, right.
or an IT recruitment firm. I thought he was trying to make a construction recruitment firm, and I had no interest in construction. He had no interest in IT. We both did not want to meet each other, and then we finally did, to acquiesce to our mutual connection. And then I had the meeting with him, and he explained that he's he's got a couple cannabis clients, really small, but he's doing some work here and there, and he wants to make a cannabis recruitment firm. And I said, that's so funny because that's what I'm trying to do. So
Do you think sorry to interrupt you, but do you think your mutual connection was just like somehow paranoid that if they said that it was cannabis, that like the CSIS was going to come after them or
no,
something? Like,
not at
why
all.
would they
No,
not say
going back,
cannabis?
it was just that they didn't have the information. It was
Okay,
just that was
amazing.
the information they had been given a while back, and the information had changed over time. So
Yeah,
anyway, so we met, and then you know I told him, like, I don't want to have a little boutique firm. I want to be like a global company. I want it to be, like white glove, like high level, great service. And he agreed, and we sort of were a bit of a yin and yang, like, you know, really complementary skill set. Um, and yeah, we joined forces in September 2018. And then I gave myself a goal, a financial goal, where I said, once I have X amount in my bank account, I'm out of here and I'll quit my job. So we called it mission free Graydon. So we were just trying to close deals outside of my job. And I was kind of moonlighting at that time, definitely, and just like doing, breaking my contract, essentially, doing what you're not supposed to do. But I had to do it, and I have no regrets. And then I was able to, quit my job in July of 2019. And it was a crazy, crazy moment. I broke up with my girlfriend then, and I quit my job like on the same day. And it was like,
Jesus.
holy crap, what have I done with my life? Like the next day I had like a little mental breakdown, and then
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot of change in 24 hours like that to
yeah,
deal with.
it was big. And then, but it was honestly, it was like the best thing I've ever done for myself is doing that, because I just bet on myself, and it worked. And so now, like, I have sort of this fearlessness and belief in myself that is sort of like, you can't buy that. So I'm very happy with my decision.
Well, that's awesome. And so, regardless of just the courage and whatever that it takes to break off and start your own company, that's a whole thing. It seems like there's a few ways that you sort of fell into cannabis market, but
Mhm.
it it, it has been, I would imagine, I guess for me, I'm curious what it was like once you dove in. Yes, it
Mhm.
seems like people had no strategy. Me personally, the people who all brought up cannabis to me in terms of wanting to invest or think about cannabis recruitment, just in my job, it comes up every once in a
Yeah.
while, have mostly been people who do not smoke weed, who have not been part of the culture at all. They've just read articles in business pages and whatever else and been like, oh man, I got to get a piece of this because it's just something new. It has a cool
Yeah.
factor for them who's on the outside that doesn't, you know what I mean? So if they're going to put their cash somewhere and whatever, but the volatility, even to the outsiders, has been crazy. I can only imagine that behind the scenes, am I nuts to assume that the volatility has been even that much greater?
Yeah, it's it's crazy. Like, there's definitely been, months where we don't close deals, and it's just really hard to run a
Yeah.
company like as small as ours and not have action. Um, and we also, like, we initially missed the wave. Like, I really was like running and gunning in the company late 2019, like the second half of 2019. And then just as we were getting going, COVID hit.
Yeah.
So prior to that, in
Okay.
like 2018, I was still thinking about starting the company and still getting my feet wet. And at the time, there was other cannabis recruitment companies, or I think there was like one, but they really ate up the market, and they ate it up during a time of like extreme growth. So we kind of came in when things started to settle and then crash. So I have yet to really like ride a wave in cannabis in terms of like,
Right.
oh, everyone's got money. Like, I haven't really like felt that. So I've just been in like constant volatility because I missed that first like section of wave. But yeah, it is incredibly volatile. I think it's taught me a lot about um, just grit, just doubling down on what you're good at. staying the course, and just, you know, a lot of it just like believing things are going to get better. But we are, because we're recruiting for the companies, we are so so affected by them and the
Yeah.
market, where, you know, like I said before, you know, one day a company is doing well and the next day they're not, because of all these external factors that, you know, we have absolutely no control over, and oftentimes they don't have any control over either. And so it ends up putting a pause on hiring and growth and things like that. So it is so volatile. It's a little bit more predictable now for me because we've seen it in a couple years in a row. Like I can always predict that there's always, like in all recruitment, there's always like a slow period. But for
I
us,
was
it
gonna
can
say,
be
it feels like
yeah,
everybody's been going through some of that, but you know,
yeah,
the company's going on freeze.
yeah. So I can kind of predict it now a bit better, but the volatility is it's not for everyone. I mean, the whole industry is volatile, so therefore it is not for everyone. But cannabis recruitment is also just not for everyone, because you're dealing with companies that do not have HR set up. They don't have any process set up. They think they know what they're looking for, and then it changes because of one little thing, and then you have to go and do the search again. Like, you know, my team of recruiters are like really, really good recruiters. Like I think that
You'd
they
have
would
to,
be I think they'd be able to go toe to toe with some of the best recruiters at like big firms in Canada, because of the sheer amount of work they have to do to fill a job, because it's so tricky and like new, and the goalpost is constantly moving. So because of that, it's like that is, but that like factor that we have is why companies work with us. Like we will go against a Robert Half, and, you know, we'll kick them off the account, because they're like, why would we work with this client? They're so frustrating, and they also don't understand all the nuance that exists in cannabis and the nuance that exists to recruit in cannabis. And we just inherently get that, like it's in our bones at this point. So it to us it's just like normalized. While to another recruitment firm, they'd be like, this is insanity.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It sounds like it. When you got started, were there a lot of competitors in Canada, or period, in cannabis recruitment versus now? How has that changed?
When we started, there was a handful of competitors. There was probably in Canada, probably like five competitors or so. Um, that number is much smaller now. So I'm proud to say we've stuck around. Um,
Yeah,
and
good for you.
yeah, so it's you know, I would say that we are probably the more one of the busier cannabis recruitment firms in Canada. I you know, obviously I don't know everyone's business and it's all private companies, but we've stuck around, and there's, you know, we notice less competition, because it is hard. It's just like there's in Canada, I don't think there's room for five cannabis recruitment firms. Like there just
Right.
isn't. There's not enough business right now in Canada alone. In the US, there's tons of firms, you know, there's probably like upwards of like 15 or something. And then there's some like pretty dominant firms as well. We do work in the US too. But in terms of Canada, like there's just the market doesn't there's not enough jobs and not enough budget to allow for that many companies, really.
Yeah. And I mean, how do you even know that at first? Because it's a new industry, right? So it's like people have to
Yeah,
discover it, go in, discover
yeah,
by failing because there's not enough
yeah.
business.
Yeah, and we were like the small, you know, we were the underdogs at the start. Like we didn't spend anything on marketing. We didn't have any investment. It was just a couple of guys and an Excel spreadsheet and work ethic and, you know, internet connections. You know, and then like we just really grew organically. Like, you know, our tech stack is just where I'd like it to be now. You know, it's took years for us to sort of get there. And you know, at the start we didn't have budget to go to these, you know, events, but now we get to go to the events and things like that. So we've always just been growing at like an appropriate pace, and I think that's like really helped us survive
Yeah,
these years.
for sure.
Mm.
So, you know, a lot of people from COVID on have been looking for, sometimes barking up the wrong tree, in my opinion, but have been looking for more stability, more stable options. Lots of people getting let go all over the place, internal recruiters, agencies as well, people who are doing business development, their whole industry has dried up. AI
Yeah.
has changed a lot of the game for people who are in creative, for example. And we've seen that change the face of creative staffing agencies a fair bit, North America
Yeah.
wide.
Yeah.
So, some people are trying to go stability, stability, stability. You've gone the other direction, right? Which is high
Yeah.
risk, not only start your own agency, but in a brand new industry that is stigmatized, it's exciting, but it's up and down.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like, because things are so bonkers, there's probably going to be a crop of people coming up this year, next year, who are going to want to make the same leap. What would you say to people now who are wanting to go more bet on themselves, solopreneur, or start a new job? Or like, how would you advise? Do you think it's advisable? Is now a good time? Is it a bad time? Not in cannabis, even, but just period. Well, how do you feel about that move now that
Going
you've been in
going
it?
from something more steady to something less steady.
To something where you're betting on yourself, whether you're starting your own business or you're going off on your own, instead of staying in a more corporate and steady job.
I am I'm probably biased because I just have this is how I lived my life. Like I dropped out of university and joined the music industry and I'm still involved in music. And then I've got White Ash, but I I think there's something so valuable about betting on yourself, even if it's a small way, like even if it's starting a side hustle and like trying to make
Right.
that work. I feel like, I mean, that's how White Ash was started. It was just a little side hustle that grew. So, and I don't know everything, but I do know that there's something so empowering about having control and autonomy, and with control and autonomy comes a heavy amount of responsibility and accountability because you're accountable to yourself. No one is
Yeah, sure.
ensuring something happens for you. But I think we're going to see more people in the next couple of years, taking risks on themselves. I think that just my viewpoint is that at some point when you do it, you really understand like why people do it. And it's almost hard to put in words, but you get so much out of it. Like for me, I'm not a multi-millionaire or whatever, but like I'm really content in life because I have control over my life and I've like created this life to me that is worth living and worth building. And like you couldn't pay me enough to like go back to working for someone respectfully. Like that's the thing
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
is maybe some, for some people it's like stability is awesome, but right now in my life, like I love to live in the unknown because it like excites me and it pushes me. And I'm also just like okay with things being tumultuous because I've learned that things are not always tumultuous all of the time. Like it
No,
always get to steady ground, like always. So if you stay the course, that's at least my belief is that, like my girlfriend always says, like the highs are high and the lows are low. Like she reminds me, because like I'll have a day where we like lose a big deal or I lose a client or whatever it is. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, the world is ending. And
it's over. That's it. It's all over. Yeah.
she's like, literally tomorrow you're gonna get like some really good news. And then it literally always happens that way. So
Well,
it's
for sure. Exactly.
yeah,
And that's just recruiting in general, though. Like,
it
I
is.
feel like that's, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? The stakes are higher, but I think the definition of stability has changed a lot in the past couple of years, where
Yeah.
people at some point thought that stability meant going in-house as a recruiter. Now that's been more volatile than agency, with people getting left, right, center, salaries all
Totally.
over the place. That's become the more volatile option recently.
Yeah. I don't
So
think anything
you
is
never
stable.
know.
Yeah. I don't think anything is stable. Like people are like, oh, I need like a stable job. And it's just like, yeah, I just don't. I mean, in the world I live in cannabis, nothing's stable. And sometimes we get people to, the finish line in a job and or a job opportunity. And then they go, well, I don't know if I can do this because I don't know if it's stable. And I'm like, it's not. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, it
Guaranteed.
isn't stable. I don't know what you thought this was. This isn't Google, but like, it's not stable. And that's sort of the choice that you're making. But yeah, I don't really believe anything is stable forever, like things are always in flux, and there's outside forces that are pushing things and squeezing things, and you have to factor that in. But if anyone's listening and considering like starting something on their own, I'm always happy to talk with people. I'm always encouraging people to bet on themselves.
Well, that's awesome. And so, question for you: there's a few tectonic plates moving around right now, making things unstable. Right? You've got, obviously, during COVID, people got hired like crazy for way too much money. Then there's a market correction happening. You've got people who are in the baby boomer age bracket who are all retiring in the next few years, like a big chunk age-wise, highest percentage of the workforce retirement age in recorded history, period, is happening in the next. So C-level people, a lot of whom are VPs, whatever, will retire, for better or worse. And then you've also got Gen Z age people who more and more in smaller numbers are opting into the traditional workforce. A lot of them are like, it's not worth it. I'd rather have my own Insta and sell jewelry that I make and do some substitute teaching, travel, and just do a few different things instead of getting a job at RBC and working my way up or whatever. Do you feel that the cannabis industry is reflective of, like, are more Gen Z people interested in gravitating over to cannabis because they're fine with more? Their risk tolerance for volatility seems unbelievably high comparatively.
It does seem higher. I have a little brother who's a Gen Z, and like all of his friends have little weird side hustles that, like,
that's what I mean.
When I was that age, it was very uncommon to think that way. It was like you were kind of the weirdo of the group. But now it seems a lot more common. I think that in terms of like cannabis and your question, I think what's going to happen is that there's people that have been watching the cannabis industry and are looking at it from the sidelines and are waiting for the moment to go into it. Excuse me. I don't think all the players that exist that are going to really move the cannabis industry forward are yet in the cannabis industry. It's still so early. And I think people that are really smart, that are watching from the sidelines and waiting for the right time to enter. And I know this because we get a lot of people reaching out to us that aren't in the industry, obviously, and are curious about it. And they're very, very smart people, and they're, watching and waiting on the sidelines for the right moment. When the industry started, salaries were ridiculous. They were astronomical. So people came in for money. And then when things got hard, they left, which makes perfect sense. So the people who are remaining were the people really committed because the money came crashing down, and the people remained. So those people are like, those people are either going to remain because they've put so much into it, and they feel they're at like this point of no return where it's like, oh, well, I've got to remain because I've been through the dirt and the mud. And then there's
too much into it.
Yeah. And then there's a group of people that are going to go, I can't handle this anymore. Like, this is dumb. Why am I suffering? Why am I, breaking my back and, working these crazy hours in this tumultuous environment? And they're going to leave. So in cannabis, there's always like, it feels like we go in waves of mass exodus. But I think once the industry stabilizes, there's going to be a lot of people that were like slightly risk adverse that are going to come in. And those people are going to have a lot of a really good impact. And a lot of it just has to do with the market, right? Like Canada, there's too many cannabis companies, and it's sad, but there's a lot of nails in coffins that have to happen, and more consolidation, because we don't need 900 cannabis companies to serve the Canadian cannabis market. So
exactly. And there's no chance that all these dispensaries, like I say, on Queen Street can survive. There's no chance that, you know what I mean? Like there's no chance that
we're not smoking that much weed. And the only way that really changes is by getting new people into cannabis, like getting new consumers, bringing them into the industry. And that is a slow grow thing. Like it takes a long time for a customer to be introduced to something that they've been told for 50 years is bad for you and is illegal. Like that's a large mental thing to get over.
That's one. For sure, that's one type of person, but also there's apparently the numbers in Gen Z again are of people who are the percentages of people who are newly getting into being Gen Z or the subsequent generation are percentage wise way lower, way less likely to drink or do or
Yeah.
smoke weed or do any kind of drugs than Gen Xers, Gen Y, and whatever before them, where it was much
Yeah.
more normalized. So it's like that's also at an all time low. And I mean, maybe they will get into it over time in a different way than just like getting wasted at a party kind of thing. If
Yeah.
there's many other uses, but it also seems to be at an all time low, which is got to affect future projections, I'm sure as well.
Yeah. I think that the sort of bridge into cannabis is not smoking it. It's, it's
Yeah.
more like an edible or a topical or something that you drink. That's kind of the best way to bring people into the market, because they're not just gonna, someone who's never rolled a joint and they're 50 years old, that's a very scary thing to do that. If they're not a smoker, if they're not really into that stuff, then that's not a customer. And so the market in Canada is sort of like where it's at. It might grow a little bit over time, is my belief, but the market's going to stabilize once the amount of companies is reflective of what actually needs to be consumed in Canada. Obviously, there's companies in Canada that don't even sell to Canada. They export their flower to Australia and Israel and these other countries, and that's always going to be important. But I think, back to your question, I think that there is going to be an exodus of people that are frustrated, and then there's going to be once the market kind of picks up again, then there'll be another entrance of people that are excited, and it's just going to go in waves for a few years, and that's just the reality. And a company like mine just has to continue weathering the storm and ride it out.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the overarching message to an extent, because I think a lot of people in recruitment are feeling the same thing now, because the volatility, like you said, is everywhere. Is really weather the storm, and if you bet on yourself, it's worth it. Even it's worth weathering the storm.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, yeah, everyone has their own sort of factors that they're juggling, but I
Absolutely.
think for me, and why I started the company and why I'm still so excited about it, is because I'm not looking at today and tomorrow. I'm really trying to look ahead and understand like the value that we're creating, not only for the industry of course, but for my team and my business partner, and for me, and my future family and things like that.
Absolutely. And Graydon, this is the reason why I wanted you on too, because I think that there's a lot of different ways to approach anything, but especially now, like I feel like you're an example of someone who's seen success over a longer period of time, being a solopreneur and recruiting in an industry that most people don't even realize that there are recruiters in still. So I think
Yeah.
there's just a lot of ways to come at something. Not all recruiting agencies are the same, far from it. Not all options that are out there are the same. And this is a big part of why I wanted you on today, is for people to sort of hear that there's other options. There's different kind of ways to approach it creatively, either to align with somebody like yourself or a new business, or go out on your own. So yeah, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, there's so many ways, and like the the team that I have hasn't worked at traditional recruitment firms, right? And so that's a whole different ball game compared to working at a smaller firm where there's less oversight and less process, but there's more freedom, but there's more risk. So everything's a balancing act, and it's like, what's your your appetite for risk, and choosing your route that way. I'm obviously like pro risk, but some people are, they don't want to deal with that, and that's perfectly fine. And the world is good when there's a balance of both.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Graydon. I appreciate it, man. This was great.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you on one of our panels again in future too. That'd be great.
Yeah, I would love that. Definitely. Thank you so much for having me on, Rick. This is really cool.
You're welcome.
Talk about recruitment all day, and I'm sure you could too. So
and same. Yeah, that's the thing. But anybody who's watching this after the fact, because this is pre-recorded, right, on Facebook, on YouTube, or on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a message if you have any questions for me, or reach out to Graydon directly, and
Please
and let's
reach out
continue the
to me
conversation.
if you have any questions or any thoughts. I'm always happy to chat.
Thanks a lot, Graydon, and thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.